They called her dramatic, said she was just some emotional woman in uniform when she cried during the national anthem at halftime. One stadium employee even joked that her tears were for attention, not for service. No one asked her name. No one asked why her hand trembled when the trumpet hit the third note. No one cared that she stood completely still, dress uniform pressed, boots shined, a tiny glint of a ribbon edge poking from under her left lapel. She didn't say a word. She just stared straight ahead, eyes brimming, not moving even as the mocking whispers swelled around her. And when the anthem ended, she walked off the field alone. But the next day, someone from the maintenance crew found what she left behind in the locker room, folded carefully beneath a bench, wrapped in a handkerchief embroidered with 5 initials and a date. Inside, a bronze star, a folded citation letter signed in blue ink by General Hawthorne, and a photo. 11 soldiers standing in sand and smoke, all of them saluting her. That's when people finally started asking who she really was. If you believe that no one should be shamed for remembering the fallen, if you believe that grief is not weakness but the cost of service, then like and subscribe. Because this isn't a story about being too emotional. It's about being the only one strong enough to remember when everyone else forgot. The moment had seemed small at first, buried between halftime performances and snack runs. Just another ceremony no one paid much attention to. They introduced her on the loudspeaker. Sergeant Lena Hartwell, U.S. Army medic, Operation Iron Veil. And most of the crowd clapped without listening. She walked slowly, steadily, onto the field, the weight of her ribbons stitched into every step. She had declined to speak, declined the spotlight, but they'd insisted she at least stand during the anthem. So she did. And when the first few notes played, Lena's breathing changed. Her shoulders locked, her spine straightened, and her eyes grew glassy. She wasn't hearing music. She was hearing radio static. Screams. The pounding rhythm of chopper blades against smoke. That song wasn't just a song. It was the last thing she whispered over a bleeding sergeant's chest as she tried to keep him grounded, tried to keep him alive long enough to hear it one last time. She cried quietly, but the phone saw it. And so did the internet. A teenager posted a clip. This what heroism looks like? Cringe. Within hours, it was viral. Lena didn't respond. She just walked off the field when it was over, folded her cap, and drove home. She didn't know the video had reached an old platoon member in Nevada, or another in Michigan, where that by dawn, a quiet thread of text messages was circulating across the country. No one asked, should we? They only asked, where? Because Lena didn't need defending. But her memory, theirs, deserved to stand taller than a meme. And when the stadium hosted its next ceremony, the field wasn't quiet anymore. That time, 11 boots walked in behind her. And this time, when she cried, they all did. Because silence isn't weakness. It's what courage looks like when no one's watching. The internet didn't see a combat medic. It didn't see the woman who crawled through smoke and blood, who packed shattered lungs and cracked ribs with trembling fingers while gunfire echoed like war drums through the night. No. It saw a woman in uniform crying, and that was enough. Within 48 hours, the video had nearly 2 million views. Overreaction much? One comment said. Probably a PR stunt. Another laughed. Army Barbie can't handle the anthem. The hashtags were cruel. The laughter was loud. But Lena Hartwell didn't hear any of it, because she wasn't online. She was back at her desk at the VA logistics office, checking medication inventories and double confirming inbound shipments. No press releases. No statements. Just silence, like always. But someone else sighed. Someone who knew that cry. Staff Sergeant Riley Voss, retired, was thumbing through his phone at a gas station in Nevada when the clip hit his feet. And in less than a second, he stopped breathing. Because that wasn't some emotional stranger on the screen. That was Doc Hartwell. That was the woman who dragged him out of an ambushed convoy with 3 cracked ribs and a collapsed lung. She'd held his hand in the sand, blood pouring from his side, and whispered that stupid anthem under her breath, off-key, barely audible, because it was the only thing she could think to do as the medevac circled late. She'd saved him, and now the world was laughing at her for remembering the price. Riley didn't post. He didn't argue in the comments. He just opened an old encrypted thread titled Iron Veil Ghosts, where 12 former soldiers still checked in every now and then. He dropped the link in 2 words. It's Lena. The thread blew up. Some hadn't seen her in years. Others hadn't spoken her name out loud since their last tour. But none of them hesitated. One tight, "Where's this stadium?" Another answered, "I'm 10 hours out. I'll drive." By that night, flights were booked, uniforms pulled from closets, boots polished for the first time in years. Not because Lena asked, but because she never would. And that silence deserved more respect than every news anchor combined. Back in the town, the high school board was scrambling. The virality had turned sour, news headlines were emerging. Veteran mocked for crying at ceremony, hero, or hoax? The principal called Lena to discuss next steps. She declined, politely, firmly, until she saw the event program someone emailed her. There, on page 2, in bold font, veteran presence encouraged. Up to 10 service members welcomed for on-field photo opportunity. The caption didn't make her angry, it made her tired. The way they tried to wrap patriotism around staged moments, the way memory was something to pose with, not protect. That's when she said yes. Just not in the way they expected. She didn't tell anyone what was coming. She didn't need to. That wasn't her job anymore. Her job had always been the same, keep them alive. And now, they were coming to return the favor in the only way that mattered. Quietly. Uniformed. Unbreakable. The game would be different this time. Not because of who would stand on the field, but because this time, the world would finally have to look Lena Hartwell in the eye and ask themselves why they ever thought remembering was something to laugh at. The second game was set to start just like the last. Bright lights, school band warming up, stadium buzz echoing with nachos, whistles, and half-listening families. The national anthem would play again, of course. That was the plan. Another halftime veteran tribute, this time better coordinated. Per the principal's email, complete with a revised script, a longer list of approved talking points, and a PR-ready photo op for the local paper. It was all stagecraft now, but Lena Hartwell didn't show up to perform. She arrived early, parked in the furthest lot, sat in her car for 15 silent minutes with her hand resting on the same folded handkerchief she'd left behind the week before, the one stitched with 5 initials, 5 men who'd never come home. Her boots felt heavier than they had in years. She wasn't here to cry this time. She was here because something had shifted. She didn't know what to expect when she walked back into that field. She didn't know if people would stare or snicker or turn their backs. She didn't know that in 3 separate airport terminals, across 3 time zones, 11 men were already on their way, uniforms brushed, boots laced, each carrying the weight of her tears like a personal call to arms. They arrived one by one. No one made announcements. No one told the school. These weren't politicians. These were soldiers, former medics, infantrymen, a sniper who now ran a family farm, a comms tech who hadn't spoken publicly in 8 years. Some hadn't worn their uniforms since discharge. Some still had nightmares. But every one of them had one thing in common. They owed Lena Hartwell more than they could ever repay. Not because she saved their lives, though she had, but because she carried them after they returned. She wrote to their families when they couldn't. She called in wellness checks without being asked. She once drove 2 states over in a snowstorm just to stop one of them from swallowing a bottle of pills. And now, after all she gave, the world had the nerve to laugh at her grief like it was some performance. Not today. Not again. They met behind the bleachers, exchanging no more than a few brief nods. Their body language said enough. When the halftime ceremony began, the announcer read the same script. Tonight we recognize a returning veteran. But the sound system couldn't compete with the crowd's murmuring. Because something was different. Lena wasn't alone. She walked onto the field slowly, like before, spine straight, uniform immaculate, her cap tucked tight under her arm. But this time, as she reached the center, a low rustle rose from behind the student section. Boots, 11 of them, moving in formation, calm and certain, stepping out from different corners of the stadium. Some had shaved heads. Some were graying. One walked with a cane, titanium rod in his left leg from an IED in Kandahar. They moved as one, breaking protocol, ignoring the confused stadium coordinator waving a clipboard from the sidelines. They weren't there for the camera. They weren't even there for the crowd. They were there for Lena. As the first note of the anthem played, Lena lowered her head, eyes closed, breath shallow. But before her lip could quiver, a boot stepped beside hers. Then another, until a full squad stood shoulder to shoulder around her. Boots dug into the grass, hats in hand, forming a silent wall of memory and defiance. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't know how to. It was too quiet, too sacred. Phones rose, of course, but none dared speak. Because the anthem wasn't just playing anymore. It was echoing through a battlefield only those 12 remembered. Lena's eyes glistened again, but this time, when the tears came, no one mocked them. Because every man beside her was crying too. Silent, stoic, steady, but crying. For the dead. For the years. For the fact that Lena had stood alone the first time, and they'd let her. And now, they never would again. The song ended. Silence followed. No applause. Just stillness. Reverence. Then, one by one, the soldiers saluted her. Not the flag, not the crowd, but her. Because some heroes don't ask to be recognized. They just stand quietly and wait for the world to catch up. The principal tried to step in, offer a handshake, guide the moment back to the schedule. But no one moved. Not Lena, not the squad, and not the crowd, who had finally understood that what they'd witnessed wasn't a ceremony. It was a homecoming, a reckoning, a long overdue correction for every quiet warrior who was ever told to keep it together, while their soul cracked beneath the weight of memory. The student who posted the first mocking clip was there too, silent in the bleachers, his phone forgotten in his pocket. He didn't record this one. He just stood, hands at his sides. For once, listening. The players on both teams remained off the field. Coaches didn't blow whistles. The referees lowered their flags. And Lena? She looked around at the men who'd traveled hundreds of miles to stand beside her. And finally, she smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. When she walked off the field, they walked with her. And this time, the crowd parted. Not with applause. With respect. Because some stories don't need to be shouted. Some don't need medals or microphones. They just need to be seen, together, in silence. They called it the moment that silenced a stadium, but what came after was even louder. Not in sound, but in consequence. The footage of Lena Hartwell standing on the field flanked by her platoon, 12 soldiers, side by side in worn dress uniforms, spread faster than wildfire. This time, no one mocked. No sarcastic captions. No laughing emojis. Just quiet reposts, shared with captions like, "This is what remembrance looks like," and "I've never cried watching a national anthem until now." The same teenager who posted the original mocking video re-uploaded a new clip. No sound effects, no edits, just Lena saluting with tears in her eyes, surrounded by the only people who understood. "I didn't get it before," the caption read. "Now I do." Within hours, major media outlets picked it up. Within days, the mayor called a press conference. But Lena didn't attend. She stayed home, took a shift at the VA, filed reports, sorted incoming prescriptions for PTSD trial patients. When a reporter showed up at the clinic, she politely declined the interview. "There's nothing to explain," she said softly. "I cried for my team. They showed up for me. That's the whole story." But it wasn't, not really. Because what had happened on that field had done more than go viral. It had broken something open. Across the country, veterans began sharing their own moments of quiet grief. Photos surfaced, an old Marine weeping behind a grocery store dumpster after seeing a flag folded on the news. An Navy corpsman who kept 6 dog tags on his dashboard but never told his fiancée why. A woman who still stood at attention every time she passed a particular stretch of desert highway because that's where her convoy was hit in 2008. Lena had never asked to lead a movement, but she had accidentally given permission for something people didn't know they needed, to feel, without shame, to remember, without asking forgiveness. And that kind of leadership couldn't be faked. It had to be earned. Earned the way Lena did, with bandaged hands, cracked ribs, and a voice that never once said, "Look at me," even when she was breaking. Back in the town, things changed. The high school permanently retired the halftime honor spotlight and replaced it with a new tradition, the moment of standing silence. Every home game, the anthem would play, but no performances. No speeches. Just 1 minute where people stood and thought of those they lost, or those who hadn't come home the same. Lena didn't ask for that either. It was Arya Bennett, one of the school's junior ROTC cadets, who pushed for it. She didn't need to be recognized, Arya told the board. She just needed not to be mocked. That's the least we can do. The board voted unanimously. And it didn't stop there. A local journalist uncovered Lena's service record, not from her, but through an FOIA request. What they found shut everyone up for good. Bronze Star with Valor. 6 commendations. 8 successful extractions under hostile fire. 2 field surgeries performed without backup. One life lost in her arms, her best friend, Sergeant Lewis Grant, whose initials were the first stitched into the handkerchief she always carried. And then there was the letter, the one found folded with her medal, signed by General Marcus Hawthorne, confirming that Lena's final field maneuver in 2011 saved an entire squad from encirclement. Sergeant Hartwell, it read, exemplifies what quiet valor looks like when no one else is watching. That quote was etched in bronze less than a month later, placed beneath a new plaque at the stadium's entrance. It read simply, "In honor of the medics who remember, even when it hurts." It didn't have her name. She asked that it didn't. "Put his name instead," she said, pointing to the fifth initial in her handkerchief. "He died in that sand. I just got out." But still, people knew. Veterans began showing up quietly at games. Not for the sport. For the silence. In the crowd one night, a father explained to his 9-year-old daughter why a woman was crying before the kickoff. "She's remembering," he said. "And when she remembers, the rest of us learn how." Lena never gave speeches. But 3 weeks after the second field walk, she agreed to say something, just one thing, at the final game of the season. They handed her a microphone. She looked down at it for a second, then raised her eyes to the crowd and said only this, "You called it weakness. I call it memory. You mocked the tears because you never had to earn them." Then she placed the mic down gently and walked off the field. No fireworks. No standing ovation. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't hollow. It was full. Dense with truth. Packed with every unspoken word from every soldier who ever stared too long at a folded flag and wondered if anyone would ever understand. Lena didn't want a following. But she got one anyway, not of fans, but of witnesses. People who now knew what it meant to carry something alone, and to finally, blessedly, be surrounded by others who would never let you fall again. It didn't end with applause. There were no parades. No medals. No viral hashtag that lasted more than a few days. But that was never what Lena Hartwell needed. What mattered came in quiet echoes, a letter in her mailbox with no return address. Just the words, "I stood when you stood. I finally stood." A coffee paid for by a stranger who didn't speak, just nodded with eyes that had seen the same desert she had. And one morning, a little girl in a school hoodie who tapped Lena's elbow outside the VA clinic and said, "My grandpa said you're the bravest person he's ever seen." Lena knelt down, looked the girl in the eyes, and said softly, "Tell your grandpa I only remembered. That's all I did." But it wasn't. And over time, the world caught up to that truth. The stadium plaque became a pilgrimage site for quiet veterans passing through town. Someone began leaving pairs of combat boots beneath it. No notes, no names. Just empty boots, toes facing out. By the next fall, there were 16. On the first anniversary of the field formation, the school held no ceremony, but the stands were full before kickoff, and for a solid minute during the anthem, the entire crowd stood in stillness, hats removed, no phones raised. Just breath. Just silence. And 12 new figures walked onto the field. Not Lena's old platoon, but students, veterans, family members. One was a teenager who'd posted that mocking video a year ago, now in ROTC uniform. He stood tall, hat pressed against his chest, holding back tears. Redemption happens quietly sometimes, like healing bone beneath a scar. Lena watched from the stands this time. Not front and center. Just one face among many. But she wasn't alone. Arya, the ROTC cadet who pushed for the silence tradition, sat beside her. So did Riley Voss, the retired staff sergeant who'd rallied the platoon with a single message. Even Sergeant Grant's younger brother flew in from Texas, and no one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. The baton had been passed. Lena's tears had created a fault line, but also a foundation. She didn't need to cry anymore, because now others did it with her. That winter, the school board voted to rename the gymnasium. They offered to name it after Lena. She refused. Instead, she requested one simple change, the Remembering Hall. No initials, no rank, no bio. Just a place where grief and honor could coexist. Where veterans could sit. Where students could ask questions. And where the silence wasn't awkward, it was respected. Lena spent more time at the VA. She volunteered twice a week at a peer support group. The young veterans called her Doc, even though it had been over a decade since she'd worn that title in combat. She never corrected them. Some names, after all, are earned forever. One evening, she brought in a shadow box to hang in the group room. Inside it, a folded handkerchief with 5 initials, her bronze star, and a photo. 11 soldiers, standing in sand and sun, all saluting her. Above it, in block letters on a small brass plate, were the words, "You never cry alone again." That was the promise. Not just to her, but to every person who'd ever folded up their feelings and tried to carry them in silence. That spring, she got a letter from the Department of Defense. A copy of a report, unrequested, confirming that her actions in Iron Vale had been nominated for permanent recognition in the Army Medical Museum. She laughed when she read it. "Took 'em long enough," she murmured. But she didn't frame it. She didn't hang it. She tucked it into a drawer beside a box of letters she'd never mailed. Letters to the families of the fallen, still waiting for words she never could quite finish. But now she had time. She had space. She had peace. Because the world had changed, not all at once, but enough. Enough to let her rest. Enough to let her cry without shame. Enough to let her walk into a stadium, hand in hand with a stranger, and know that no one would ever call her grief a weakness again. On the second anniversary of that anthem, they held the silence again. Lena didn't attend. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. She was planting flowers that day at the VA garden, kneeling in the soil with mud on her hands and sunlight on her back. When a young vet asked if she wanted to head to the stadium, she smiled and said, "They've got it now. They don't need me to cry anymore." And she was right. Because at the very moment the anthem played, every head in that stadium bowed, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. That's what Lena had given them. Not noise, not drama, but understanding. And through her silence, they had finally learned how to listen.